Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with you guys, and for some of you, to be with you again. So just out of curiosity, how many of you participated in some or all of the virtual sessions that we did during the pandemic? A scattering of you. Great to see you live and in person. For the rest of you, let me give you a little bit more of an introduction, other than here's the guy who's going to do the thing with you this afternoon. So I've been at the work of leadership development now for about 30 years. And I've had the opportunity over these 30 years to work with just about every kind of organization that you can imagine, oftentimes from top to bottom, to create cultures of leadership. So I've been involved in the study of leadership, the practice of leadership. I've been writing about leadership, coaching leaders for 3 decades plus. And I'm the first to admit, I don't have it all figured out. I'm not here today as the guy with all the answers, certainly. But I have noticed a few things along the way that I think for some of you, you're going to find to be a confirmation of who you already are and what you already do. And it just feels good to have somebody come along and acknowledge that and give you the opportunity to step up more into the instincts that you already have. For others of you, I think you're going to hear some new ideas about your own leadership, some new ideas that you can bring back to your clubs and to the experience that you give your members every day. And I'm just going to tell you that what we are going to do here this afternoon is, I feel pretty confident in this statement, it is unlike anything that you have done before. By the time we're done this afternoon, we will have done something together that I think, again, no exaggeration to say, at first you'll think it's not possible, but it will be. So this is going to be, as Beth said, in 2 parts, and they are very closely connected, but not in the way that we typically think about these 2 things. We're going to be incorporating a good deal of music and expression into our experience together. The first part, I'm going to lay out the context for you. We're going to put in place the principles of leadership, or what I call extreme leadership, set the foundation for it, give you some things to think about and try and talk about a little bit, and then we're going to apply it in some new and unusual ways. So I'm going to draw on the ideas that I've so far put out in 4 different books. Love is Just Damn Good Business, The Radical Leap, The Radical Edge, and a book called Greater Than Yourself. Has anybody here had any familiarity with any of these books so far? Great, okay, a few of you, terrific. So these are the principles we're going to draw from, but let me start with a little bit of a story as to where I came from and how I came to do this kind of work. Because my path was not necessarily a linear one either. I started out at a young age, at 13, as a matter of fact, I started playing guitar. That was one of the songs I learned right from the beginning. And if you would have asked the late teen, early 20-something Steve Farber what he'd be doing in his 30s, 40s, 50s, and now 60s, I would not have described this, because I was going to be a musician. So I started out and did everything with full passion when it came to music. In 1977, I think, 77, 78, I bought my first really good guitar, invested some money in it, bought it for, I think, $380, which I really had to dig for back then. It was a pretty expensive guitar back then. And I went to college, and I wrote my first songs on that guitar, and I had my first band with that guitar. And then in 1981, a couple of significant things happened. I graduated college, and I got married. And I started out down this journey of understanding for the first time in my life that the endeavor of being a musician and the endeavor of, feeding people were mutually exclusive. So I gave up the music. And I needed the money, so I sold my guitar. I sold it to a woman named Leslie for the same price that I had bought it for a few years early. This was 1982. Now, I sold it to her for $380. And to this day, I remember watching Leslie walk away from my apartment carrying my guitar. And it felt like I was watching the death of a dream. And I know that sounds terribly tragic, but it wasn't. I mean, in some ways it was, I suppose. But that's when I set off on a new journey, and I had to go out, I had to make a living, and I had a friend who brought me in to the commodities futures business. I didn't know anything about it other than I needed to make money. If any of you have had any experience with the commodities futures market, you should come talk to me and I'll talk you out of it. For the rest of you, let me put it in perspective for you this way. Investing in commodities is sort of like investing in the stock market, except it's risky, if that puts it in perspective for you. I mean, the stock market begins to look like a checking account next to the commodities futures market. But I was able to make a living, and that's when I discovered that I was an entrepreneur. Within a few short years, I had my own small brokerage firm, and I absolutely flat out hated it. I hated it because people lost their money. That's the nature of the beast. So I had a moral dilemma with my own business. And that set me off on another journey to discover what the hell I was supposed to be doing on this planet. So by this time I had a business background, and I also had a performance background through the music and some other things that I had done. So I kind of put that all together, and I started doing consulting work and presentation skills and all kinds of stuff with businesses. And I went on to forge out a career. I've had some incredible mentors. I spent time at the Tom Peters Company. Any of you familiar with Tom Peters' work? Any read Tom Peters' books or book covers, perhaps? So Tom was one of the great management thinkers of our age. I went to work at his company, and I found my new path. But music has always been a big part of me and what I do. And then a few years ago, I met a couple of guys by the name of Isaac and Torald Koren, otherwise known as the Brothers Koren. Are you guys backstage somewhere? There they are. Okay, so this is Isaac and Torald. Now I just want to say a couple of words about these guys. First of all, let me just say in full transparency, I was hoping like hell you were back there because I didn't see you out here. And here they are, like a jack in the box. So these guys are, I'm going to swell their heads a little bit. These guys are world-class musicians. World-class. Now, what do I mean by that? That means they are in a class of musicians who have traveled the world. So under their band, known as The Kin originally, they toured with the likes of Pink, Coldplay, Rod Stewart, Bon Jovi. So they're really extraordinary, and just as, if not more important, they are phenomenal human beings. When we first met, the very first night we met, we played music until 3 o'clock in the morning. And I just want to tell you what that felt like for me. So I'm a guy who gave up music as a pursuit all those years ago. Never gave it up as a love, never gave it up as a passion. And I sat down with them, and they heard me and acknowledged what I had and encouraged me to bring that more fully into the world. They brought out of me something that I had kind of, in some ways, stuffed away. And what I came to understand about these guys, who you are about to get to know very, very well, What I came to understand about them is that is what they do. That's who they are. They have this remarkable, not only ability to bring the best out of people, but it's based on a desire to do that. It's based on a love of not only of music, but a love of talent, a love of spirit that all of us have, and they just bring it out of us. So I thought, to get us rolling today, we'd start with a little bit of music from, as they call themselves nowadays, for obvious reason, the Brothers Corin. So would you welcome them to the stage, please?
What an introduction. Such a pleasure to be here with you all. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever the time is. It feels like morning in our Californian time.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. What a pleasure. There's nothing like a Steve introduction. Yes, we are the Brothers Corin, and it's such an honor to be here and to be with you for these hours. We're going to just start with a song that we used to close all of our shows with for many years. And
A little warning, we believe that everyone has a voice worth hearing. And we believe as vocal coaches or coaxers, the importance of not caring about what the person next to you thinks about your voice, because they're worried about what you think about yours. Sorry, they're worried about what you think about theirs.
it's a little bit like dancing for some of us, right? It's a different version of the instrument, but there's nothing maybe more vulnerable
That's
than
right, you
using
clear
our
your
voice.
throat now.
It's a good time to clear.
Get ready.
Yes.
Me.
The 30 seconds of how we're here today. 7 years ago, on a break from touring, we had this crazy download, we'd call it. This idea to foster and nurture other voices from all walks of life. And we'd been coaches and mentors, even as artists, but we put it together as an idea. We thought it was one of our new bad ideas, and it turned into what we do today, which is to work with voices from all around the world, particularly people that have felt inhibited, and also companies and groups of people over the last 7 years where song and music and voice gets to be the fabric or cohesion of human beings getting to express themselves. Because when we wake up in the morning, we all have a voice. So our mission has shifted over the last 7 years, and that's how we know this incredible man, Steve Farber. And this is still what we do. We get to sing to people as well. So this is called Everything's Changing. And our mother always reminds us, honey, everything's always changing. This is how we go. Here we go.
Time moves slowly. I'm watching my feet. I'm watching my feet as I'm falling into the moment. I burn like quickening. You're playing my heart to the pulsing generation. Oh, when the ground is shaking, nothing is steadfast, and it's like you couldn't rely on love to keep you falling in so fast. When everything's changing, I wanna stay close. When everything's changing, I wanna cry out. Everything's changing. My change reaction. Do I wanna feel safe? Do I wanna ride out to see it? To release it. When all is taken and nothing's for keeps, taken by the monkeys and dreamers. Ooh, you're ready to lose it. Oh, when images explode in your mind, it's like you couldn't rely on reasoning to get you through this time. When everything's changing, wanna stay close. When everything's changing, I wanna cry
feel you. All right, if you're a Homo sapien, then your ancestors over the last millions and millions of years have given you this gift of a voice, complex vocal learning, mimicry. So, like I said, we're calling it Dare to Suck here, okay? That's our motto. Dare to suck, trust us. Greatness and sucking are right next door to each other.
Close.
That's how we've gotten this song, and every other song we've written was just daring to suck.
Yeah.
So here we go. You're gonna sing after me, mimic what I'm singing. Ready? Dare to suck. Oh, come on. Yeah. Oh, come on, louder.
And everything changes.
Na na na, oh yeah.
Everything changes.
Na na na, oh yeah. Here we go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Everything changes.
Everything's changing now. Yeah. Oh, I wanna stay close when everything's changing now. Yeah. Oh, I don't wanna cry out. Everything's changing.
Well, that was
We're
a
gonna
great
have so
start.
much
That
fun.
was a great start.
Thank you, fellas. Thank you, boys.
See you in a bit.
Yes, we'll see you in a bit. You feel warmed up? Okay, we're just getting started. All right, so now we're going to spend the next little bit of time really focusing in on you and what leadership is. Now, you just experienced your voice, and I think we all know by now that our voice, as not only as human beings, but particularly in the role of leader, our voice is really critical. Without our voice, we can't connect. Without our voice, we can't inspire. Without our voice, we can't motivate. Without our voice, we can't express what's important to us. Without our voice, we can't express what's important to our teams and to our clubs and to the communities that we serve. And when we put all this together and put it into practice, it can be a little scary, as you just experienced. Leadership, let's just be really clear about this out of the gate. Leadership, the way we're talking about it here, and the nature of leadership, in my opinion, leadership has nothing to do with your position or title. So let's just get that really clear right out of the gate, okay? So this is not a message for people sitting in senior positions alone. It is a message for people in senior positions, but every single one of us has an opportunity to lead regardless of position or title. Would you agree with that or not? And I'll try to be polite about this. I've met plenty of people over the years in my work who sit very prominently on their company's organizational chart, have very lofty and impressive sounding titles, have thousands of people that report to them, yet still have, and this is the polite part, a bit of work to do as far as their leadership goes. And the other side of that equation is far more important. I can't tell you how many people I've met over the years who have no positional authority whatsoever. They're nobody's boss, they're nobody's manager, they're nobody's supervisor. They're out there, they're on the front line, they're doing the work with customers, and yet they're great leaders by virtue of who they are, what they do, how they approach their work, how they live their lives, and their ability to influence people around them to change the nature of things for the better. Now, I'm going to share with you what I've learned about this. Like I said earlier, I don't have it all figured out, but I have had a very unique experience since the day that guitar walked out of my apartment in Leslie's hands. I've had a very unique experience because I've had the opportunity to have a wide variety of input from all kinds of leaders in all kinds of industries. So on the one hand, what that means is I have expertise in none of them. But except the one thing that all of them, at least for now, that all of them have in common is that they're all populated by human beings. So this that I'm going to share with you is informed by the work that I've done in the trenches for 30 years. It's also deeply informed by my mentors. And I've been blessed with some incredible mentors. I mentioned Tom Peters earlier. Another is a fellow by the name of Terry Pierce, who was one of the finest executive coaches on the planet. I say he was, because unfortunately Terry passed away a few years ago. And I'd like to think that part of his legacy lives in me. He was writing years ago in the San Francisco Examiner about his work in coaching executives. And what he was trying to describe is what happens for a lot of these people when the idea of leadership smacks up against the reality of leadership, and what happens for a lot of these people when they begin to come to terms with that reality. So here's the way Terry put it. He said, there are many people who think they want to be matadors, only to find themselves in the ring with 2,000 pounds of bull bearing down on them, and then discover that what they really wanted was to wear tight pants and hear the crowd roar. The minute you find yourself in the ring, facing down 2,000 pounds of literal or figurative bull, that's when you begin to realize that this leadership stuff is not about the accolades, it's not about the status, it's not about the applause. We put ourselves at risk oftentimes to accomplish great things, and therefore it begs some pretty significant questions that we have to ask of ourselves, and begs some pretty significant experiences that we have to put ourselves in order to lead effectively. And some of those things are inspiring, and some of those are scary, and it all wraps together. But the underlying theme for everything that we're going to talk about here, therefore, is that first and foremost, we have to make sure that we're not posing as leaders and that we don't tolerate the posers among us. Now, how many of you have heard this term poser before? Okay, let me tell you how I learned it in this particular context. I first heard this from my son Saul, who's now 40. And I learned this from, sorry, it always takes my breath away just a little bit when I say that. I learned this from him when he was 10. And I remember it was when he was 10 because that's when he got his ear pierced. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I just thought 10 was a little bit young, which may explain why he got his ear pierced when I was out of town. Actually, if you must know, his mother pierced his ear when I was out of town. That's my ex-wife. It's not significant, it's just true. A little therapy for me, thank you. But that was also the time that Saul started wearing a size 38 pants. So this was a skinny 10-year-old kid wearing essentially my pants. Do you guys remember when the baggy pants, the baggy clothes thing first started? Okay, well Saul, as it turns out, was an early adopter of that baggy style because he was a skater. And in California, where Saul grew up, it was the skaters that started wearing the baggy clothes. Not just because it was a cool countercultural fashion statement, which it was, but it gave them the flexibility and the mobility to do all that, kind of crazy stuff on their boards. And pretty soon, that style of dressing up in the baggy clothes became a fashion statement because you had all these other kids dressing up like skaters, and these are people who would never even dream of imagining to attempt to do something like this. And it really pissed off the skaters because they said these people are posing as us. In other words, they're trying to grab some of our glory without ever putting themselves at risk, without ever sticking their necks out in any way, shape, or form. So it's my argument that, let's just acknowledge posers are pretty much everywhere, right? It's really easy to talk a good game, to dress oneself up in the right clothes, metaphorically speaking, say the right things, use the right buzzwords, and not follow through with the actions that are supposed to be associated with it. So we see posers in just about every arena. We see them in the political arena. We see them in the family arena. We see them in the community arena, and particularly the arena where you and I spend so much of our time, the work arena, the business arena. There's quite a few posers out there. Have you ever worked with for or around one in your career? And then some of us, maybe we have caught ourselves posing ourselves from time to time. Like with the buzzwords, for example. Have you heard any business buzzwords over the course of your career? Have you? Here are some of the classics. Do you remember re-engineering? I particularly remember that because it was in the early formative days of my career. In the early 90s, there was a book called Re-Engineering the Corporation that came out, which was a huge New York Times bestseller. And what I noticed, within about 2 weeks of that book coming out, I had clients that were no longer changing things, now they were re-engineering them, as if somehow using that new word, miraculously transformed everything. I mean, seriously, I heard people use the word that way. Move the stapler from the left side of my desk to the right side of my desk. What have I just done here? re-engineered my workspace, right? That's a productive day. I had a friend who was going through a divorce at the time, told me he was re-engineering his domestic strategy. That's innovative. That's something. And then this is the all-time classic buzzword, as popular today as it was 20, 30 years ago. How many of you here have ever empowered anybody? So empowerment is one of these buzzwords, right? We all know we're supposed to do it. We know what empowerment is supposed to look like. But in reality, what it looks like for a lot of people is hoogie, boogie, boogie, you're empowered. I empower you to go out there to make things, to make decisions, to improve things around here. So go forth and be empowered. Just don't screw it up, and before you make any decisions, check with me. So we use the buzzwords without stepping into what the words are supposed to be, and we find ourselves posing, really. So we could talk about the posers among us all afternoon, and we'd hear some great war stories, but I think it's far more instructive, far more constructive instead to examine the polar opposite of the poser, which is the person that I've come to call the extreme leader. So not just leadership, but extreme leadership. Now, a couple of words on that phrase, extreme leadership. On the surface, it sounds like another buzzword. It sounds like a snappy buzzword. It sounds like marketing. And frankly, if you want to accuse me of doing a little bit of that marketing thing with the phrase extreme leadership, you would not be entirely unjustified, I admit. But the real problem with the phrase extreme leadership is that it's redundant. It's a repetitive phrase. There should be no reason to modify the word leadership with the word extreme. Because leadership, if we're really doing it, if we're not posing, if we're really in it, if we're really doing it, it's already extreme. Because leadership is an intrinsically extreme act because it's about the act of transformation in one way or another. It's about taking nothing and turning it into something. It's about taking something good and turning it into something extraordinary. It's about stretching and growing our own skills and capabilities and doing that for the people around us. This is already extreme stuff. So extreme leadership is really just my way of saying real leadership. A person who, in my estimation, strives to take a radical leap day in and day out. So LEAP is going to be our framework. You could think of it as an operating system. You could think of it as a manifesto. It's our pathway to extreme leadership, and it stands for love, energy, audacity, and proof. The extreme leader, the polar opposite of the poser, is somebody who strives to cultivate love, generate energy, inspire audacity, and provide proof. So you see these are 4 characteristics, and they're all preceded by a verb. So this is an active sort of a thing, not just about understanding the vocabulary, but putting it into practice. Now, I'm just going to guess that where we're going to spend the next little bit of our time, for some of you in the room, is going to be a little bit of preaching to the choir. I fully expect that because I've gotten to know many of you, and I know I don't have expertise in the world you live in, but I have deep familiarity with it. I have good familiarity with the hospitality world as a whole, so I'm pretty confident in saying that there is a bit of a choir in the room that I'm going to preach to. In that case, if that is the case, my hope is simply to get you to sing a little bit louder in that choir, which we will be doing not only metaphorically, but literally as well, a little bit later on. And this is that element that I suspect is at the core of who you already are. We are not, as business people in general, in my experience, we are not accustomed to using this word in the same sentence as business. It makes some people squirm. Love has a lot of baggage associated with it. We have a lot of ideas as to what this means, and some of us tend to think of it as sentimental, warm, fuzzy, California, touchy-feely hoo-ha crap, and we back away from it when it comes to our business. And I think that is tragic. Not only is love not inappropriate in the context of business, it's at the very foundation of what great leadership is, and it's at the very core of any great, thriving, competitive business. So I want to give you the thinking behind this, and then we're gonna dive into the application of it. This practice of cultivating love is at the foundation of the whole LEAP framework. Love generates energy, love inspires audacity, and love requires proof. And I will get into each of those elements as well, but we're going to dwell on this just for a little bit, and I'll start with some of the research behind this. One of my mentors is a guy by the name of Jim Kouzes. Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner are the co-authors of a body of work that has been written in a book called The Leadership Challenge, which if you haven't read yet, I highly recommend that you do. I know it's a cliche to call anything other than the Bible, but it's really the Bible of the leadership research. Most significant body of research on leadership on the planet for the last 40 years. Just coming out in its 7th edition in the next month or two. I want to share with you one of their many findings in Jim and Barry's own words. Here's what they said from their research. After numerous interviews and case analyses, we noted that many leaders use the word love freely when talking about their own motivations to lead. Now, to be clear on this, numerous is a pretty vague term. Numerous can mean any number of things. Is 20 numerous? Maybe. In this case, numerous means literally, and by the way, literally is a word I use literally, tens of thousands of individual personal best case studies in both the public and private sector on every continent on the planet for 40 years. That's what numerous means. What they found is when people are asked a very simple, direct, and rather personal question, this word comes up. And that question simply is, why? Why did you do that? Why did you step up? Why did you take on that leadership challenge? And that's where you hear the L word. Sometimes you hear the synonyms like care and passion and compassion and concern, but the word love itself is used most frequently. And if you think about this rationally, and if you think about it critically, and most important, if you think about it from your own experience, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I mean, think about this. Why would you stick your neck out? Why would you put yourself at risk to accomplish something if your heart weren't in it? So listen, it may not be love in exactly the same way we use it when we talk about love of spouse or child or significant other, but it is love. It's love of something or someone. It could be love of the cause that we believe in, love of the values that we stand for, love of the people that we work, love of the members that we serve, love of the great future we can create together. There's got to be something here, or we simply don't have the juice to step up. And even if we did step up without that connection of the heart, we certainly don't have what it takes to persist through the inevitable obstacles that get thrown in our path whenever we try to do something cool. And sometimes those obstacles are things that are just a natural part of doing business. Sometimes these things are just a part of the human experience, and sometimes they hit us in significant and extraordinary ways, like we all experienced, and when I say all, I mean all, capital A, all, experienced over the last few years in the COVID era. If our heart wasn't in our work, could we have survived, let alone thrived, through that era? And I remember I was hearing stories from you guys when we did the virtual sessions and when I was preparing for those sessions, the things that you were doing for your members in response to people being in isolation, and they were beautiful. Where does that come from? Was it an intellectual pursuit? Was it, hey, let's see if we can figure out some way to manipulate these people so that they'll still, want to maintain their memberships? That's not where it came from. It came from, we're in need. People are suffering. Let's help. If that's not an act of love, I don't know what is. What I'm suggesting is it shouldn't take a pandemic to bring that out of us. And for you guys, I know that wasn't the first time you experienced it, but it brings into sharp relief the power of it, nonetheless. I have been on my soapbox about this for a good number of years. I am convinced, and I'm willing to be wrong, I am willing to be wrong about just about everything. I really don't think I'm wrong about this. I think love is the right word. I think it describes the right experience. And as business people, we have to embrace that. And not just embrace it philosophically, but embrace it as a discipline and a practice. And it's going to solve a lot of our problems on a macro level as well. But I will also admit to you, I wasn't always quite so confident in using this language with business people. When I first started talking about this idea, after it became really clear to me through all the work that I'd done and the research that I'd been a part of and all that, this was it, it made me nervous. And because I didn't know how people were going to respond to it. When I wrote The Radical Leap, it came out in its first edition in 2004, my biggest concern was I didn't think that the content of the book was going to live up to the title, because it was so obvious to me that I thought people would read the book and say, well, there's nothing radical about this. Turns out it was pretty radical for a lot of people. But back in those days when I first started talking about it, I remember, just to give you an example, I was speaking at a conference of 1,000 engineers. Now, I've done a lot of work with engineers and scientists over the years, so I'm well aware of the stereotype, which is I'm an engineer, I don't do that people thing. Keep the people out of my way so I can get my job done is like nirvana for a stereotypical engineer. I know it's not true for most, but it still made me nervous when I stood up in front of 1,000 of these people from the internet and telecom industry, and I stepped out on stage and I started talking about love. So I didn't know if this was going to fly or not. So I was being hypersensitive to the body language to see if I was getting through. And from what I could tell, I was actually getting through pretty well. Then a couple days later, I got back to my office, and I had an email from somebody in that group who was a manager of LAN technicians, network guys. And at least I got through to him, because he wrote to tell me, he said, hey, Farber, you know that love stuff you were talking about? He said, you're right on, man. He said, I've been telling my guys this since the day I became a manager 10 years ago. And I thought you'd appreciate seeing it in his own words. Here's what he said. I've told my technicians to make the customer absolutely love you, take you home to dinner, love you, meet the wife and kids, love you, because if the customer loves you, you could blow up their building and they'll say accidents happen. Which is probably not the best business approach, by the way. But this does tell us something really interesting about the nature of the customer experience. So this is the thing. In your club, what is your standard? That's the question. What's your standard? Is your standard that you want to give your members an experience that they're fine with, an experience that they're satisfied with? If that's your standard, I'm going to suggest to you that that kind of thinking can get you in trouble. Because it used to be, I'm beginning to sound like the old man in the room. Yeah, back in my day, it used to be customer satisfaction was a big deal, and that's true. When we first started talking about customer satisfaction, it was pretty radical, because up until that point, a lot of businesses didn't even think about the customer. They were just making their processes more efficient and all that to make life easier for themselves. Then we started talking about the customer. So now customer satisfaction has become a baseline expectation. We expect to be satisfied everywhere we go. It's just the entry to the game. So it's not when they're satisfied with us, but when they love us. When they love us, that's where the good stuff happens. That's where the word of mouth comes from. That's where the repeat business comes from. That's where the loyalty comes from. That's where the forgiveness factor comes from, as our friend here is telling us, when things don't go according to plan. So here's the logic in this. We want to create an experience and amplify an experience that our folks are going to love. And what I'm suggesting is the only way to make that happen in a meaningful and sustainable way over time is to back it up one more step and create an environment or a culture, the word that we like to use nowadays, that people love working in. So think about your team, think about your staff, think about the folks on the front line in your clubs doing the work. Do they love the experience of working there? I'm going to suggest that if they don't, it's very difficult for them to convey that experience to the customers or the members. Does that make sense? You guys, I mean, you know this. You've had this experience, I'm sure. Have you ever been in, let's say, I don't know, a grocery store, and you're looking for something, you can't find it, so you ask an employee for help, and it becomes really clear to you in that moment that this person hates this freaking place? You ever have that experience? Their eyes start rolling in their heads, it's over there. And then you talk to somebody else, and you ask them for help, and they light up, and they take you to where you're looking for. They engage you in conversation. And here's the thing. I'm not saying it's true 100% of the time, but most of the time, I know that's not a scientific term, but most of the time, what you experience from that individual is a direct reflection of their experience in working there. I'll give you an example. I shared this with, I think, in one of the virtual sessions. I do a lot of traveling, and I was out in Boston a number of years ago to speak to the senior management team of a company at the time. It was called Sovereign Bank, a regional bank. They didn't exist out in San Diego where I live, so I'd never heard of them before. Now they're a part of Santander, but back then they were Sovereign Bank. So I did my research ahead of time. I learned a little bit about the company, spent some time on the phone talking with the senior managers to learn about their culture and their objectives, and did all my usual education stuff. I had a pretty good education on Sovereign Bank, but I'd never actually been in one. So I got to Boston a day early, and I took advantage of the extra time that I had on the road to finish up some personal business that I had going on, which required getting a couple of documents notarized. So I went to the concierge of the hotel, told him I was looking for a notary, and he said, well, we don't have one on staff, but there's a bank across the street. Pretty sure they have a notary there. It's called Sovereign Bank. You may want to go check them out. So I thought, well, that's convenient, because now I can go get my personal business done and do a little reconnaissance work at the same time, do a little ghost customer thing, right? So I walked across the street, and it was a small branch. There were two tellers sitting side by side. I walked up to teller number 1, told her I was looking for a notary. She pointed to teller number 2. She said, that would be Rosella here. Rosella is a teller, but she's also a notary. I said, well, thank you very much. So I stepped over to Rosella's window, and we started doing the usual notary stuff, signing, stamping, and whatnot. Now, here's what I need you guys to know. I didn't say anything to Rosella about who I was or what I was doing there, and what was going to be going on in that hotel across the street the next day, where I was going to be speaking to all the big bosses of the company that she works for. I didn't say anything to her about that. It was just signing and stamping and small talk, and it was all quite lovely. She was a nice person, nothing particularly extraordinary, but nice. And then after she stamped the last stamp, I asked her a question that I've asked every notary that I've ever used. What do you think that question is? No, not do you love your job, not how do you like working here. Much more transactional than that. How much? What do I owe you? And she said, oh no, you don't owe me anything. This is just a service that we provide to our customers. And I said, well, Rosella, I'm not a customer. And she said, oh, that's okay. Maybe you will be someday. I thought, hey, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So then I was struck with the inspiration to ask that other question that you just asked. So I said, because it occurred to me, I can get an anonymous glimpse into the culture through Rosella just by asking her another simple question. So I said, hey, Rosella, would you mind telling me, how do you like working here at Sovereign Bank? And I'm telling you guys, there was no hesitation. Her face lit up, and she said, I love it. Just like that, I love it. And then she started telling me about all these other banks that she'd worked for and how terrible that last place was, but this place was so different because people took care of each other. And then she started going on about her customers, and she said that her customers sometimes will stop in the bank just to say hello, even when they have no banking to do, because that's the kind of relationship that they have. And I have this rather strange habit that when I'm talking to somebody who's telling me something that's really relevant to my work, I like to take notes. So she's talking, and I'm writing on the back of one of these documents that I just signed. So what I'm going to share with you is an actual word-for-word quote from Rosella. She said, I love my customers, I get great pleasure from serving them, so I'm happy. So she was explaining this wonderful kind of virtuous cycle that happens. I love them, makes me happy to take care of them. The happier I am taking care of them, the more they see how much I love them, so they love me in return, and they stop in just to say hello, which makes me love them even more. And it's just beautiful stuff, right? So at one point I looked up at her and I said, hey, Rosella, would you mind if I quoted you on this? And she said, would you like me to notarize it? So what do you think I said? Yes, please. And she did. So what you're looking at here is the back of Rosella's business card. She took out her business card, wrote those words across the top, stamped it, pushed it across the counter to me. I picked it up, ran across the street, took a picture of it with my iPhone, stuck it in the PowerPoint deck, which is why you're seeing it now, and I shared it the next day with the senior management team, and I said, hey, guys, look what you have going on right across the street. This is Rosella the Teller. I mean, she's unbelievable. And the big boss was so impressed by this that he ran across the street to say thank you to Rosella. Can you imagine how that blew her mind when this guy comes walking in? If she even knew who he was, frankly. But the impact that must have had on her and therefore on her customers that day, and around it goes. So please don't tell me that love has no place in business. Of course it does. It's just damn good business. Which is, frankly, why I wrote a book called Love is Just Damn Good Business. Because love is just damn good business. So the thing is, if we can establish a standard in the environment that we contribute to and work in every day that says, let's create an experience for our team, for our associates, for our employees, for our staff, that people love working in, what is the implication for the customer? So, I think there's a pretty big implication on all levels. One of the things that I'm always curious about in the business world is we all want evidence. We want some kind of quantifiable proof that any idea is good, and I get it. I have some concerns about trying to quantify and define love. Honestly, I have some concerns about it because I think we know it. I think we know it when we experience it, and if we overanalyze it, we run the risk of diluting its power. So, for example, for you married guys in the room, imagine this scenario: your wife says to you one day, "Honey, do you love me?" And if your answer is, define love, that's going to be a problem, right? So we don't have to define it. We know it when we experience it, and frankly, we use it in lots of different ways. We use it in lots of different contexts. I love pizza. I also love my wife. I love them very differently. You could argue one I shouldn't love and one I should. But it's still love. There's something related to it, and we don't have to overanalyze it. But what I will tell you is that the impact that putting it into practice has on our business can be significant. So Warren Buffett, one of the most successful investors in companies on the planet, has been asked the question, how do you account for your great success, probably a million times. Well, I happened to catch one of those answers in an interview that he did. I saw it on the Motley Fool website a while back. And they asked Warren Buffett, you've got this incredible track record. How do you do it? And he talked a little bit about the usual answer that he gives about their ability to do the analysis, and he's a genius with numbers. He talked about all that stuff. But then he said, in the final analysis, before I buy a company, if everything looks good on paper, before I actually buy that company, I have to sit down in the same room with the CEO. And I have to look into his or her eyes. And there's something very specific that he's looking for. Here's what he said. I look into their eyes and I try to figure out whether they love the money or if they love the business. If they don't love the business, I can't put my money into it. Then if he buys the company, he said, my job is to make sure I don't do anything that kills that love of that business. So again, This isn't hard science, it's not a statistical analysis, but I'll tell you, in that simple question, in that simple 15-second answer, he uses the word love 4 times. And he goes on to say that one of the reasons that's so critical, he said, if I look into their eyes and I don't see the love, but instead I see dollar signs and I can hear the cash register ringing in the distance, for those of you who remember what cash registers are, he said, then I know that the only thing this CEO is interested in is the exit strategy. In other words, how quickly they can stuff the money from this transaction into their own pocket and get the hell out of there. And I'm trying to invest in an asset that's going to grow in value over time, and that's not going to happen unless the love is there. So, I'm not making this up, in other words. So again, here's where we are. We want our members, our customers, to love what we do for them. Therefore, we have to create an environment that people love working in. Now, let's back it up one more step. I cannot create or contribute to that environment that people love working in unless what? I have it myself first. I need to love it myself first. Love it, love them, love the business, love the customer, love myself first. Steve Jobs, I'm not going to rehash the whole Apple story. You know, we all know what he accomplished in his lifetime, creating the most valuable company on the planet. You know, whatever. But there's that period of time in Jobs' career where he experienced the most significant and public humiliation and failure in the technology world when he got fired from Apple. The company went off the rails for a while. He eventually came riding back in on the white horse, turned the place around. The rest, as they say, is history. Well, he gave the commencement address at Stanford University back in 2005. And it's a great speech. If you haven't heard it, I recommend you go listen to it. You can find it on iTunes, I'm pretty sure. And check it out, because he's telling his story. And when he got to the part where he talked about how he made it through those difficult times, here's what he said. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. The only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work, and the only way to do great work is to love what you do. So, again, I'm not making this up. So, let's pull this together. It'd be really easy to misinterpret what I'm saying so far as, well, all I got to do is love what I'm doing and everything's going to take care of itself. Do what you love and the money will follow. There was a book written by that title a while back. Is that true? I don't know, maybe for some. For me, that seems a little simplistic. So doing what you love is the foundation, but it's not the whole story. So I like to wrap it together this way. Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. Doing what you love is the foundation. It's where you get your juice from. The context is the service. I'm doing what I love, but I'm using that to serve you, to bring great value to you. And if I do that in a significant way, the result is reciprocity. You love me in return. And when you have those folks, when you have those members, for example, that say, I love this club, I love this community, I love the experience you've created for us, man, I mean, isn't it obvious that we want everybody like that? And the better we take care of those people, the more amplification we get from it. So do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. Here's where to start with it. Here's what I'd like you to do right now. So this question is not meant, I have a few similar questions for you here today. This question is not a rhetorical question. This is a question that demands to be asked and answered by each one of us. Why do I love this business, this club, this company, this idea, this project, this colleague, this customer? You pick the context, and how do I show it? Why do I love this, and how do I show it? The first part demands reflection and introspection. The second part, how do I show it, is the part that has to be answered behaviorally. So the first part, why do I love this, or another way of asking the question is, what do I love about this, is a way to kind of get the fire burning a little bit. And then the second part, how do I show it, is where, and this is going to sound like a little bit of a strange phrase, we have the opportunity to operationalize love in the way that we do business. So the question that this funnels into is, what should love look like in the way that we do business? So I just want to go back to this one for a second real quick. Here's what I'm asking you to do with this question. I'm asking you to make this a practice. Make it a habit of asking yourself this question frequently. Because let's all admit that some days this question is easier to answer than other days, right? Some days you arrive at the club in the morning, you throw open the doors, and ask, why do I love this team? Let me count the ways. And you can write a sonnet to everybody there. And then other days, let's just say it's a bit more of a stretch. The question doesn't even come out the same way. It's not, why do I love this? It's more like, why the hell did I sign up for this? And really all I want to do is go back to bed. What I'm suggesting to you is the more difficult it is to answer this question, the more important it is to answer this question. Because this question is designed to help you pick whatever metaphor works best for you. Flip your own switch, stoke your own fire, trip your own trigger, whatever. This is designed to help you inspire yourself, because if that's not there, what's our choice then? We got to fake it. And people have a pretty good BS meter. They know when we're faking it. This is not about putting on airs. It's not about posing. It's about authenticity. So it starts with that. And then it takes us into, now that that's there, how do we show it in the way that we do business? So here's what I'm going to ask you to do right now. I'm going to ask you to turn to a partner. And you can do one of two things. You can share how you're already doing this in your club, or you can share an idea or two that you've had where you can show that love even more in the way you do business. You can focus it externally or internally, members or associates, whatever, it's your choice. Just a quick brainstorming session, turn to a partner, share some ideas, go.